Anonymous.
Sorry about that. Let me turn down this.
So I think everything has sorted itself out. All of our technical issues are taken care of. And so this is our December Alpha Mare webinar with our special guest, Krista Guloien. Am I saying your name right, Krista?
Yeah, you got it right.
Oh, good. Excellent. I met Krista through Influence Publishing, Julie Salisbury's company, because Krista is an author, recently released book called, tell us what it's called, Krista.
Beyond the Finish Line, What Happens When the Endorphins Fade.
Right.
Yes. There it
is. Carrie, you're the Vanna White of this group. She was holding up my book.
Yes, one day I'll have my own book.
Yeah, looking forward to that. So I am Evelyn McKelvey. I'm an executive coach, and I coach with horses. And that leads us into the name of our partnership with Carrie Gallant and myself, which I won't get into too much right now. But as a coach, I've been coaching for, 10 years now, and do it mostly with horses, but also I coach teams and individuals without the horses as well. Carrie, you are a lawyer, negotiation strategist, teacher, speaker, and soon-to-be author. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Evelyn. Well, I was delighted to join forces with Evelyn. I was a horse nut when I was a girl, and did a lot of riding and loved being around horses. So it's a thrill for me to come back full circle finally in translating some of the work that I do into doing that with horse as our co-partner. When I specialize in communication and negotiation, as well as being better at avoiding conflict, let alone managing the conflict. And I'm exploring a new field and about to be certified as a conversational intelligence coach. So that's a new field that we'll be bringing some of that into our work, using the horse as a co-partner as well. So I'm delighted to be here.
Great. And actually, I'm just starting that course, Carrie.
Oh, excellent.
Krista is an Olympian, and as well as a speaker and an author and a mentor, and I believe she's also getting into business. Krista, you started, according to what I read about you, you started rowing only about 15 years ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, I started in 2001, so I was 21, which I think usually is a little shocking to people to hear that I started so late. It's not that shocking in the rowing world. You can start that late. They don't usually let a rower start rowing until about 14-ish, as it is, because there's so much strain put on the body. Your skeletal setup, they want you to be more developed than less. So I found it, a little bit late. Found it at university, and took a hard detour to chase that dream because I fell in love with it right away.
Yeah. And you went fast all the way to the top?
Relatively speaking, I remember my wheels turning thinking, 2004, that's a bit fast. I do have a teammate who was in the boat with me in 2012, and she actually ended up, I think she started the year before me, and she did go to 2004 as her first games. So that was pretty fast as well in terms of development, but I made it to the 2008 games. So within 7 years, making it to an Olympics, it's pretty simple.
Wow. Yeah. And then being a medalist in 2012 for Canada.
Yeah. So in 2008, we didn't medal, and it was a bit of a disappointing performance. And I thought I was going to pack up and come home and move on at that point, but just crossed the finish line feeling like there was more to do, that I could have done more, which is kind of the way you don't want to feel. So I packed everything back up and I headed back to the training center for the 2009 season after taking a short break, and then look towards 2012.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
And that was London, yes?
Yes. And so in 2008, I was in the women's quad, which is 4 women, 2 oars each. And so I switched disciplines leading into the next quadrennial and went back to what I started it in, which was sweepings. That's 1 oar. and I was in the big boat, the women's 8. So that's 8 rowers and a driver, coxswain. And we won a silver medal in London on August 2nd, 2012.
Fantastic. So I guess as a rower, you learn a lot about teamwork and leadership in those boats.
Yes. And as I've left rowing, and I realize that more and more every day, I knew it then, but as I reflect on that experience, it's phenomenal. And we still have group texts going with my crewmates, and it's such a strong bond that I have with them, much like a family bond.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah.
Carrie, do you want to talk a little bit about leadership and start us off with our questions for Krista?
Sure. Well, I've been just as reflecting on what you're reflecting on there, Krista, as I've been reading your book and reflecting on how sports is such a great analogy, even a metaphor for leadership and teamwork, and the scenarios that you share in the book, in your work with the teams, with your team members. I was really struck by the early part of your book when you were talking about the difficult situation of being in and getting chosen for that crew for 2010, and your relationship with the teammate that you and she were down to the wire around that, and how that impacted your relationship as a team member. So I'm curious about how you reflect on that now when you think about it from a leadership perspective.
Yeah, I think, most people don't know that a couple months out of the Olympic Games, we don't have our spot solidified, and that we go into that last year, regardless of what you did the previous year or where you've sat before, with complete unknown. And I think that even going into it with your neck out that far does set you up to kind of, the vulnerability of the situation. But as I explained in that scenario, it was down to the two of us for the last spot. And yeah, I think we both had to work through that individually. Just how you even deal with that. I definitely had to use my sports psychologist at that point to make sure that I was as mentally on point as possible, because there were moments where I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel like the right mental headspace when you start, getting overthinking the wrong things or whatever. But I think ultimately it came down to we had so much respect for one another, and the work we did in the winter, the work we saw each other do, and the relationship we had built had really, after I did win the spot, she called me and said, I wanted for you what I wanted for myself just as much. And I was like, hurts my heart. But it was true. We both did. We were both, as much as you want it selfishly, the women's 8 in general is a kind of a selfless endeavor, because you're putting yourself out to be a part of something bigger than you, which I think was one of the things that I liked the most. It wasn't me racing, it's women's 8 racing. And I was just a cog in that bigger system, which is teamwork at its finest.
Yeah, I love what you said. Absolutely. And I love what you just said about tapping into that part about there was something bigger there. Yes, it was an individual struggle or striving towards, because that spot was going to go to one or the other of you, but tapping into that bigger picture, that there's something else bigger at stake. I think it really struck me when you were talking about this, how this is such an important area to be in, because we know that for so many women, one of the things that stops us from being, shooting for that brass ring, from shooting for that seat at the boardroom table, from shooting for the CEO spot, whatever it is that we're afraid we're going to hurt the person next to us. We're afraid that we might be sticking our neck out, as you say, too far. I talk about the tall poppies, and you can see I have them in my room there. And one of the risks for being a tall poppy is getting your head chopped off. And so there's that metaphor of how if we aren't standing together or tapping into that something bigger, how difficult that can be. Mm-hmm. So thank you for sharing that. One of our topics, our main topic in our conversation series is about power. And so, thinking about all the things that you experienced both as an athlete and in your life now, how would you define power for yourself? What do you think about power?
I mean, kind of tied to what we were just talking about. And I've been thinking about this recently too, as I mentor young girls and I watch them and their behaviors in the collective and as individuals, and kind of curious as to, what's holding them back sometimes from being their best version of themselves. And I think there's definitely, it's like hesitation or fear maybe, where they haven't found it. And I think for me, rowing was such a gift because it's something that I liked. I was distracted. So I actually didn't know how powerful I had become and what I was doing, because I was distracted in the process of it. And all of a sudden, in hindsight, you look back and you're like, whoa, or you repeat an action that you did before in your sport and something, I think I am one of my strengths is I'm a little bit fearless. I go after things, and I see a lot of people. It doesn't mean I'm not afraid, because I am, and I'm afraid of a lot of things, but I see a lot of people not doing stuff, like not going for it, or thinking that other people are going to do it maybe on their behalf, and that they don't have to be the initiators. And I think, there is a lot of power in initiating, and there is a lot of power in sticking your neck out, and a lot of power in going after the unknown, something that could be fabulous. I just heard a recent quote that said, what's the best that could happen? And I love that, because I was like, what a nice reframe. Instead of what's the worst that could happen, what's the best? And I said that to one of my friends. She was thinking about adopting a dog. And I said, try this question on. What's the best that could happen? Of course, we have all the fear-mongering lists of things that we could think about that won't be good. But the best that could happen is actually quite exciting. And I think I was able to see that with rowing. So now when I see myself not practicing in that way towards the other things in life, I can, I think about what I've done, and it reminds me to buck up.
Yeah, thank you. As you're saying that, I'm reminded of a part in your book when you're talking about, meeting up with the U.S. That was the nemesis, I suppose, or your real rival that the Canadian team had been up against before and hadn't been able to close the gap at the end. Getting out early, fast, the Canadian team, and then being surpassed by the U.S. in the past. And so there was something about when you were talking about going in 2010, how you were up against them again, and how the shift of focus for you, I think, primarily, and perhaps for the team, wasn't necessarily on beating the U.S. It was continually focused on the gold, not just to medal, but continuing to focus on the gold. I like that, what you just said, that quote. I had to write it down. What's the best that could happen? I can imagine that being, what's the best that could happen? You could win gold, and having that focus.
Yeah, that definitely got us through. Winters were long, seasons of training were long. There were lots of World Cups. There were races that didn't go our way, and there were things we were trying and things that didn't feel good. And in order to, not be daunted by that big end goal, it was always those small steps, turning over every stone and making, benchmarks along the way that we were proud of and that we attained, knowing that they would work towards the bigger picture.
Nice.
Evelyn, you want to pick up?
Well, our next question is usually, when and how did you become conscious of your own power?
I actually think, I often think it was rowing, and maybe I'm forgetting something rosy and awesome that happened before rowing. But I had a lot of anxiety as a kid. I had separation anxiety from my mom. I struggled in school. Struggled to stay there. I was good at school, but I didn't want to stay. I wanted to run after her car or go home or make sure she'd be there to pick me up. I was always very anxious. And it was rowing, really, something switched. And once again, part of me thinks I was, distracted in the endeavor, distracted and trying to get the perfect stroke or make the boat go really fast. I didn't even know what I was doing until I was in it. And I felt so connected, and so I was contributing. Like I immediately felt like I got it. I said that's so weird because I didn't really get it. Like I wasn't moving a boat perfectly. I never did. No one ever really does, but definitely not as good as I was doing it at the end. And there was just something about it that felt, just really connected to that. And I felt powerful and I felt confident majority of the time. Obviously there were moments where I wasn't sure if I was going to make the team, and I was, there was something going on that threw me for a little bit of a loop. But majority of the time, that's where I felt most confident in my own being, was when I was rowing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the first time that you became aware of yourself as a leader?
I don't know if I have a story in mind, but I've always, I don't even know what I've always jumped out and been that person. So like maybe it's a competitive streak. I don't exactly know, or maybe someone taught it to me, but, and this is what I see often with groups of young people that I work with, where you say to a classroom, would someone volunteer? And I would be that volunteer. Or does someone have something to share? And I would share that. I really hate it when a room sits silent and no one initiates. It's like one of my pet peeves. And I think that that's great leadership. And I think when I see young people doing that, I think that that's so awesome, because we need people. What are you all sitting there doing? Who's going to do it if you don't do it? And I don't know where I learned that, and I don't know when I first did it. But I think that's a good skill.
Yeah, that's probably innate. Nature versus nurture.
Maybe, yeah.
What have you done to develop your personal power?
So much stuff. I mean, there was a time when my power had a bit of a downturn, and that was when I left rowing. I've had moments where I felt really powerless and out of control of what was going on with my universe. And one of the reasons why, I think, is because, that Olympic goal is so finite. It's so determined. It's so structured. It's the be all end all of the way that you're organizing your life. And then once you're back in the real kind of world, you're juggling multiple things, and you can do anything outside of that one task that you had been for so long. And it was just like super overwhelming to me. And to have to choose, I just, that one kind of almost felt like it chose me. And now I haven't felt the most powerful since I left rowing. And to kind of regain it, I've gone through many different journeys and projects, one being writing the book. So writing Beyond the Finish Line, What Happens When the Endorphins Fade, I literally wrote about that. I wrote about my experience and journey, knowing that other people were experiencing transition from different standpoints in their life and would relate to me, as well as athletes. Like obviously athletes would be what you would think would relate the most, but I know everyone's going through this, whether it's job change, life change, city, retirement of a conventional career. So I think that was big, and personal development in terms of education and networking and counseling and coaching, going to events, like all of these things, a lot of like-minded individuals. These are all things that I've done to try to rebuild. I talk about building a tribe, and in my team, in that group, I had a tribe of women who were like-minded, going after the exact same thing. So it's been, and I had a lot of power in that, because that was in itself a little, a bubble, a little fortress of solidarity and comfort that I haven't had since, but have rebuilt in a different way beyond the finish line.
Yeah. Great title, by the way.
Yeah.
Carrie, do you want to take the next question?
Yeah. Well, there's certainly a lot of parallels and lessons to take over in all those categories that you mentioned. Before you even mentioned them, I was reflecting on how the parallel is for, career changes and retiring, any big major life changes where that maybe that tribe disappears, the tribe that you had, or and as you say, as the singular goal, and all of a sudden it's like, woo, what do I do now? And all the tools that you mentioned that you tapped into, I think are the ones that we all need to tap into on an ongoing basis. And it sounds like, I was also thinking about how, if I was to take a lesson from what you just said, it would be about continuing to put your neck out, continuing to put yourself, you say that your role models have been along the way and even today, and why do you have them as your role models? What makes them your role model?
Can you just repeat your question, because you froze for a second there for me and I didn't hear.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just asking along the way. I know from reading your book that there were a few that you mentioned, but I'm curious for our program here, who would you say were your role models, and why did you choose them? And what about for today? Who are your role models today?
I have come from a very strong line of women, and I think my mom, my grandma who just passed away, aunts, cousins. There's a lot of females in my family, and I've always drawn a lot of strength and power from them. And then in actual sport, my teammates were my closest role models. And I've always been, and I do believe in having the kind of real live superheroes in your life to kind of to use as proof and power that you can do something as well. Obviously, like the classic Silken Laumann and Marnie McBeans of the rowing world, we all knew who they were, and other females from past rowing. Kirsten Barnes, our sports psych, she was also, a really high level, one of Canada's best female rowers. Those were the obvious, but it was the day-to-day watching my teammates. And I said yesterday, I messaged one of my teammates, Darcy, on Facebook and said, I looked up to you before I met you, and I look up to you even more now. Like those women, watching them do what they did was how I basically, like, who I looked up to.
Yeah.
With this next question is, we all have expectations that we may perceive that others have of us, and I'm sure there were a lot of expectations on you when you were part of the rowing team, especially going up to the Olympics. But how do you manage those expectations? How do you manage others' expectations of you?
They've been really overwhelming to me in the past, and I think it's made me quite anxious. And I think I've done some reframing of that too. I think my interpretation of people's questions of me, like what was I doing next, or what am I doing now, I took it on at points as an expectation, and I took it on as pressure, but I don't think that was anyone's intention. So I try not to get myself too overwhelmed about that. I think people's expectations are high because they've seen me do something that I like. The Olympics is something that not many people do. So people obviously look at that and think that it's, really phenomenal. And I agree. What I do sometimes feel is people look to people who have done things and think that they don't have some of the attributes that they have. So, but she's so strong, or she can do it, but I couldn't do it. I'm not physically, I wasn't a typically awesome athlete. Everyone that I went to high school with or elementary school with would not have most likely to get an Olympic medal. Definitely, they probably laugh. I had friends be like, "How did you do that?" Because I fell in love with something. It wasn't because I was the best athlete growing up. And so I just recently, we had an event for young girls, and I said, I think we had an awesome panel of about 13 ambassadors, female athletes from all different sports. And I said at the end, you were looking at this panel of awesome women, probably thinking that we have something that that you don't have, or the things that you have that you think are negatives, we don't have those.
Yeah.
We do. I was like, who likes standing in front of a room of 50 people, you know, sharing their story? And 2 little girls put their hands up. I'm like, you're rare. I'm like, I don't either.
Yeah.
I get nervous. My eye twitches. I feel like you start sweating. Like all those things that happen to you are happening to me too. And I think people sometimes see people that speak. I do this. See someone who has that awesome public speaking and awesome at public speaking. It is amazing presentation. I'm like, oh, they must not feel nervous.
Yeah.
That's stopping me.
Yeah.
But they don't have that. But they do have that. So I think that that's something that we need to all be aware of, that that is an expectation on some level, that they don't have something. And that's not fair to put on people. And it's not fair to put on yourself as something to hold you back, because it's completely, really, it's made up. Make up little stories.
Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm.
Lovely. Well, thank you for sharing that, because what I really heard in your message was around recognizing the vulnerability, and that it's actually the vulnerability that makes it accessible for others to see that they can also do it. And it's also, again, that part about putting our neck on the line, that it takes that level of vulnerability to achieve what you achieved in some respects. And the other part I heard too was, again, I was remembering something I read in your book about how in getting selected for the team, because it's a team of 8, that I think you said something along the lines of that none of you might individually have been the best rower, but it was that cohesion of that team working together that gets to that level.
Mm-hmm.
And that there was all that part about working together. I hope I've characterized that right. And please, if there's more to that, please fill in the blanks there. But that's what striking me about that. And what a metaphor for the workplace, for the world at large, that we don't all get there by being the singular best. It's all the ways that we work together.
Yeah.
Yeah. We, in some regards, Canada doesn't, we had a smaller, maybe, I don't actually know if this is true or not, but I would expect that we had a smaller pool of athletes, to work with. And one of the things that we came up to in 2012 was a lot of experienced athletes. And so when we came together, we had, I think 6 of 8 of us had competed in games before, and some of us had competed in 2 games before. So you had a real depth of experience. And so with that experience came the ability to not dwell on, the black and white, the numbers necessarily in front, but to pull on something more kind of cosmic and otherworldly, something that on paper, it couldn't be measured. It could not be measured what we had going on. And it was so phenomenal and so special. And sometimes there were moments where I felt defensive of it because it wasn't measured and I thought it was being underestimated, or, the science was coming in and it was, pointing at something that worked. And I was like, this is, but even watching in 2016, you see on paper, probably all of those women in the women's 8 in 2016 in Rio were stronger. I mean, I've heard that they've made comments that they were fitter than us, which I laughed. Because I was like, be as fit as you want. But if you don't work together, you can have the smartest 8 people in the room around a boardroom and they can't get themselves out of a wet paper bag. They can't make a cent. They can't work together. Like it really doesn't have to be about one ingredient or 5 that are typical. They're always trying to measure so that they can recreate, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that what we had could be recreated. And watching the games and watching other crews, struggle and not do as well, it reminded me of how absolutely phenomenal that moment in time was, that we came together over the years, but obviously over the years leading up to, 6 minutes and 10 seconds or whatever it was on that day at that time to do that. Like, it's kind of mind blowing.
Yeah. Very mind-blowing.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting with that one for a minute, thinking about all that you said, especially the part about regardless of the individual talents, ambitions, physical fitness, history, it's the really that group of 8 women coming together to make magic is what made the difference. So that's an important lesson in all areas of life.
I think rowing, and I don't know if anyone's ever read the book Boys in the Boat. To me, it was it was crazy how many similarities there were in a different time with a men's crew, and all the things that could be different were different. But there's like a poetry in rowing, and I think that is exactly it. There's this thing that it can't be measured, and it can't, it's crazy. We were tested constantly. Like that was pretty much what we spent the whole year doing. He was trying to figure out if something else could possibly make us faster. And in that, you kind of wonder, like, were we self-protecting something that we wanted either subconsciously or unconsciously? Like, is that part of it? Like, do you put the pressure on the athletes so they have to fight for something so that they're able to fight? If you're able to fight at home, then you can fight the rest of the world when you go to the Olympics. Like there's some weird stuff going on, because even the way we selected, I tell people all the time, people are like, that doesn't sound fair at all. I'm like, I don't even know if it was meant to. Like, I don't even know if it was meant to be fair. Like it definitely wasn't a controlled experiment, that's for sure. So you kind of, I start to kind of, even in having this conversation, it's just so many layers of craziness, really, that came to. But sorry for that little tangent. I just thought of it.
I love it. No, obviously it's very fresh for you still, these many years later. But competition at the highest level has got to be very intense and indelible in terms of how it changes you.
Yes.
Our second last question is about, when are women most at risk of being seen to have too much power, or being seen to be overbearing, or perhaps in other ways not admired for their power, but the opposite, say?
Always. I mean, that's a hard one. I don't even know if I want to go there, but I do think that it, for each individual person, and I don't think men of power necessarily, as we've just seen with the American election, have to be as self-aware.
Yeah.
You can just steamroll, and people seem to either embrace or support or flock to it. And women, the successful women that I've known, are quite self-aware and quite tactical, and have like a calmness about them.
Yeah.
That works, I think. And I don't know, maybe it's going to change. Maybe there will be a day, but I do think that how power is interpreted and displayed is kind of it's a fine dance, kind of an art. And there probably are moments that a lot of women in power feel like they were being received well, and there probably are moments where they're like, that wasn't received well. And I think you just have to keep, like we've kind of, the theme, if you will, is sticking your neck out and being that person. I often have felt that top poppy syndrome, even for myself. Like I've shown up and I've tried to kind of deflate what I have under my belt or what I have in my toolbox, so as not to make anyone not like me or anyone feel uncomfortable. And I actually I found my reception was the worst in those times. Yeah. It's almost like people were like, what are you trying to hide? You might as well just embrace it.
Yeah.
It's easier.
Yeah. Be authentic with it.
Yeah.
I love that answer. I think that one word answer is absolutely correct. And it's what you do with it. And yeah. Fantastic.
Our last question is, what advice do you have to women, and what advice do you have for the young girls that you're mentoring about how to cultivate your own power? I
think we all need to keep going after it, and we've talked about it. So sticking your neck out, not sitting back and thinking that everyone else has the power to do things, whether it's another woman or a man. My grandma who just passed away, she she was really, thinking about her and her life and her journey. She was not afraid of taking her spot. She had a place in the house, even if she had, a gender kind of traditional role within the home. She wasn't taking a back seat, that's for sure. And she learned, when I spoke at her celebration of life, I said, she was on Facebook. She was Skype. She had an iPad and an iPhone. She was 85. Just because it would have been acceptable for her to be behind the times, it didn't mean that she was. Because it's acceptable to sit there and say nothing doesn't mean that you have to. Yeah. And I think that that's what I'd love to see more young girls doing, taking their space and having their voice and not being afraid that they're not good enough. And I say that from a place of knowing it well, because that's how I feel. But just because it's how I feel doesn't mean it's not what I don't act on it all the time. Sometimes, we all do. But it's not when I've done my best work. And so I really want that for young girls to be initiators and leaders and step up and, put your neck out, because no one else is going to do it for you, or stop assuming that someone else is going to do it for you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about you're an ambassador for an organization called Fast and Furious, I believe.
Fast and Furious. We are Fast and Furious, but Fast.
You should make it Fast and Furious.
Yeah, people always, it's a common thing. People call it Fast and Furious. I think the movie, I don't know, it got into people.
Yeah. Fast and Female. Yes.
Yeah, so that was started by a gold medalist named Chandra Crawford in 2005, I believe. And she is really passionate about engaging young girls with role models. So real life role models being women and other sport leaders. So we have nutritionists and yoga instructors. It's not just Olympians, but there are a lot of Olympians involved. And we do events for young girls that are 3 hours long, and we do a little bit of physical literacy, and we do an inspirational chat, and they can take photos and autographs and learn and ask questions and see and what the real life athletes that they look up to do. And it's breaking down the barriers and trying to combat against the stat that 6% of girls are dropping out of sport between the age of 18. 6 times more than boys. So there's that time period where I think young women are most vulnerable to have their power taken away from them, or it's not kind of harnessed and encouraged. It's when they feel the most vulnerable. You're going through body changes. You're trying to you're finding yourself. You're experimenting with your identity. You're remember how important your friend network was, and who was cool and who wasn't cool. It was such a painful time. And if you have sport, you can learn some of these things that I learned at an even younger age. And we really believe that having, I often say, if a young girl meets me and we're in, say, North Vancouver, and she's from North Vancouver and I'm from Port Moody, but nearby, and she can see that a real life person from her hometown or near her hometown did what I did, then I believe it becomes possible for her. And I've watched these little girls light up, and it's pretty cool. I'd love to see, down the road, the girls that we affect and encourage to stay in sport and be involved are going to be they're going to be on webinars like this, and they're going to write their books and be leaders and do awesome things. And that's basically what we're trying to do.
Yeah. That's fabulous. Yeah. And how old are these girls?
So the events run for 8 to 18. Sometimes there's some youngins, like 6. But it's that we're targeting that group that's the most likely to drop out of sport, to kind of lose their connection with sport. And it's not just about like high level either. It's not about grooming future Olympians. They don't have to be fast. I mean, we'd probably let a boy in, but it's nice that they're female. We welcome anyone, but the fast and female, it's not about the level of their sport. It's just about bringing them into a non-competitive environment and encouraging them to keep it in their life, because we know what it gives.
Yeah. Fabulous. Carrie, do you have any more questions?
Well, I actually love the fast and female, the idea. You know, one of the areas that I specialize in is negotiation, and especially helping women to master the art of negotiating. And I've found anecdotally, I don't have any research that supports this, but I found anecdotally when I talk to groups of women that it's women who've done sports, and in particular team sports, that have more comfort with. Again, I think it's partly about sticking the neck out. It's partly about learning how to rely on team members, learning that failing or getting a no or having a mistake is just part of the growth. It's not like you come to the stop sign and you can't go forward. It's about that iteration, that learning iteration that happens. So I really love that you're part of this movement of bringing sport to young girls, because I think it's so essential, not only for our physical development, but for our emotional and even spiritual development as part of humanity, because it's how we learn to be together and to support. And I didn't do team sports when I was a kid, for example. I did mostly individual sports, and I think there's a bit of a difference there too. Although, of course, when you get up to the higher levels, you have to rely on a team in order to be, you know, say the fastest runner or whatever the sport is that's individual as well. So I think there's a real metaphor there with the sports. So it's delighted to have you join us on this program today to share that with us.
Yeah, a unique perspective. And I've written down the two questions that I love the most. What's holding you back? And what's the best that could happen? Great questions. Great questions too. Yeah. Thank you so much, Krista. And where can people get your book?
So you can get my book on Amazon. But you can get my book directly from me, which is the easiest way. So via my website, which is my name.com, Krista Guloien. I have my email, my contact information. I'm on Facebook. I'm on all those portals. So getting a signed copy mailed directly from me is the easiest way to get it.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
That's how I got mine.
Is that how you got yours?
Yep. Yeah, we connected on Facebook, and she said, "Send me your address," and I did, and I sent her the money, and then lo and behold, I get the book, and there it is. Yeah, signed and everything.
Yeah, I got to get my copy.
Yeah,
I've been selfishly focused on getting my book sold too. But
it's definitely a process.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot to learn in that, eh? Well, I want to thank you again, Krista.
Process of putting your neck out there too.
Sorry?
That's a real process. That's a real process of putting your neck out there too, because it's once it's out there, it's it's there as long as the publisher continues to, and you have the rights to continue printing and publishing. Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you, Krista. We're going to have you out with the horses someday, hopefully not too far out when the snow's gone.
Yeah, I had horses when I was growing up as well.
Oh, did you?
My grandpa had Arabian horses on Government Road in Burnaby, and passed on one of his horses to me when I was 10. So they had this big window in the front room, and they walked by out front and had a ribbon on her. And it was, I think there's probably a VHS video of it somewhere, but it was like I had won an Oscar. It was very dramatic and very exciting. So that was a really cool time, and I fought to ride that horse hard. That was another one of those moments probably where I put my neck out. I was negotiating hard to get on that horse. My grandpa wasn't sure that I was ready. And of course I fell off, and I asked him if I was dead, as I had some spark. I didn't know what it was like to die. And he's like, "No, you're still here and you're in trouble." for pushing so hard for this. But I love them as well. So I'm excited to come out and revisit as well.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Excellent.
Well, thank you again. It's been a great interview. I've really enjoyed this time, Krista.
Oh, yeah.
And
glad we got it all set up.
Yeah, it was a bit of a struggle initially. I'm going to edit out a bit of that stuff at the beginning and get it up on our website. And of course, will be available on Expertise TV as well soon as well. Okay. So, yeah. Thanks again. And thank you, Carrie. We lost you a couple of times there. But
oh no!
Yeah, so we lost the picture but it looked like you were still audible to us. So
Okay.
Yeah. Network problems. Ice on the line or something.
Yeah.
Thank you all, and have a great day. And by the way, have a great Christmas.
Yes,
Krista.
you too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Happy holidays.
Yes.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.